Alright, so today we're going to talk about wide bore versus tight bore barrels. This isn't meant to be an end-all be-all guide, and this isn't to say that your particular gun doesn't work well or your barrel doesn't work in your particular gun. There's always going to be inconsistencies, and maybe with your hop-up, a certain barrel will work better in your gun. I'm talking generalities, so if you had to just give the advice on tight bore versus wide bore versus standard bore to a general person without telling them, go spend $1,000 on all these different barrels and try them all, and whichever one works best is what you should go with. Just some generalities and explaining some of the, I guess, science behind it. That being said, working on explaining some terms here and working on certain bases. Okay, for this, we're going to assume that all the barrels are of the same quality, same material, same polish, and you clean your gun. Okay, because, yes, a tight bore is worse if you dump a handful of sand down the barrel and never clean it. Okay, it will jam. But, if you dump a handful of sand down the barrel of a wide bore, you're going to have issues too. So, assuming that we're talking same quality, same polish, same barrel material, and also the what I'm going to be referring to as wide bore is going to be like that 6.1 and up. Standard is 6.5 to 6.8, somewhere in that range. And tight bore is 6 flat to 6.3. Okay. I'm not going to talk about like your crazy jets and all your other types of barrels out there. If it works for you, it works for you. Some of them are gimmicky, some of them aren't. That's going to be you. Your job to test that out. Okay, so that all being covered, there's a lot of debate back and forth on tight bore versus wide bore and which is better for HPA, which is better for AEGs. Generally speaking, people recommend tight bores just right out the gate. Some people, especially in the HPA community, really recommend the wide bores. So it goes back and forth. And a lot of it is honestly down to personal preference of should you run a longer barrel, should you run a shorter barrel, should you run a wide barrel, should you run a narrow barrel, tight barrel. And at the end of the day, it is personal preference because, again, I don't know specifically what gun you're using, what hop-up rubbers you're using, or what batch of hop-up rubber or barrel or whatever you're using. And that can all come into effect. But we're going to assume that you want air efficiency, which, yes, that applies a little bit more to HPA or is a little bit more noticeable with HPA, but it also does apply to AEGs, and we'll get into why. We're going to assume you want range, and we're going to assume you want accuracy. Okay. Now, for range, one thing that we really need to discuss is this idea of maximum range versus maximum effective range. Okay. Maximum range, if I take my rifle and I crank the hop up all the way up to where it'll still feed BBs, but it's going to send them to the moon. Okay, well, I'm probably going to get the maximum range out of that. Now, also, let's say it's a little less extreme of an example, but I go with a wide grouping send it downrange, and maybe I do get the most range out of that. But if at 100 feet, if my grouping is the size of a school bus, then that doesn't really matter to me. Okay, yeah, maybe it goes further, but I'm not actually likely to hit whatever I'm aiming at. Okay, so if I so I want the narrowest grouping at the furthest range, and I want it there, getting there at speed. Okay, I want it. That's why you generally see going with higher weight BBs, because one thing to understand, and Gun Gamers did a really good video breaking it down, but basically, the heavier the BB, the more it carries inertia over time. So, if you're playing in indoor range where your typical engagement is under 50 feet or so, then it doesn't really matter. Maybe go with 2.5s, 2.8s. Okay. But if you're playing outdoors, really should be going 3s or 3.2s at minimum, and then as heavy as you're willing to buy. Okay. And as heavy as your setup can hop. Okay. So the reason being is because that gets there at speed. So where does that pertain, assuming all BBs are equal? Well, there are a lot of people who say, yes, that your Tokyo Marui out of the box will outrange anything else. It doesn't matter if it's 1 joule. And that can be true, okay? My most recent Tokyo Marui was a P90. And that thing had some really solid range on it. The problem is that even with 2.5s or 3s, they're floating when they get out there. That at that maximum range, over 200 feet or so, there's a likelihood that if the other player's paying attention, there's a likelihood they could just reach out and grab that out of the air. It's floating. And it's very likely that they could just sidestep, watch it coming in, move out of the way slightly, let it pass, and go about their day. So part of effective range also means speed. So for that, we're going to assume that everything we're talking about today is at U.S. Rifleman limits for outdoor play, which is generally 1.5 joules, 1.55 joules, whatever, about 400 FPS with 2s. Yeah, so that's about 323 or 25, I can't remember, FPS with 0.32s. Okay, so and if anyone wants to know why heavier BBs are better, I can do a video on that. That's not really the purview of this video. Okay, so that's the assumption we're working on, is that you want maximum effective range, which is tight grouping at speed at distance. Now, there's a couple reasons why you might think a wide bore is better. There's this idea that when you have a wide bore, okay, so got my little diagram, crappy little drawing, wide bore, that around the BB forms an air pocket. True for paintball. We'll get into why that's not necessarily true for airsoft. So it creates this air pocket or air cushion behind the BB, which prevents it from touching the barrel. And a tight bore, while it's better for air efficiency, your BB is going to be bouncing all around the walls, and it's not going to be as consistent or as long range because barrel drag and whatever. Okay. Now, why is that not necessarily true? Well, I will say that it is true for, I believe, pellet guns, though I don't have much experience with pellet guns, but it is true for paintball. That for paintballs, because there's no spin applied, although you can get rifled barrels, but we're talking just standard smoothbore. Okay. for a paintball gun, you want it to not touch the barrel. Two main reasons with that is one, if it touches the barrel, because the paintballs are softer than airsoft BBs, you can mar up the paintball or even cause it to explode potentially if it's a cheaper quality paintball. And also because there's no spin on it, because you got to remember that with airsoft guns, the hop up creates backspin, so it's doing this down the barrel, right? Because that isn't present in paintball guns, forming a cushion around the paintball does work, and it does provide more accuracy to a degree, right? Obviously, everything is to a degree, or in theory, okay? So that does work for paintball. Why doesn't it work for airsoft? The reason being is because of the hop up. And yes, you can turn the hop up off, but don't. Because anyone who's gotten an airsoft gun out of the box, turned the hop up all the way off, or it came out of the box all the way off, you throw a BB in there, and even with your .2s, even with a well-built, expensive gun, this is an MTW, your 2s are going maybe 100 feet with the hop up off, and that's not good for airsoft, okay? So for airsoft, we have to use hop up, unless everyone's just willing to turn their hop up off, but that's weird. Okay, so because there's hop up, what's going to happen in your barrel, okay? All right, sorry, I had to add a drawing. Okay, what's going to happen is because of hop up, the BB, because it's spinning, right? You can see on my new crappy little drawing, it's spinning. So what's going to happen? Well, as it goes down the barrel, your BB is going to be rotating up, right? Because that's what a hop up does. Okay, up towards the end of the barrel for reference. And as soon as it leaves the downward pressure of that nub, it's going to start spinning. Okay, as it starts spinning, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to hit the top of the barrel. Okay, that's why if you've ever cleaned a barrel that hasn't been cleaned in a long time, you'll notice there's white paint along the top of the barrel. Or it looks like white paint. It's actually plastic or whatever color BBs you use. So as it's going down the barrel, it's going to want to rotate up. Now, initially what's going to happen is it's going to hit the top, and then it's going to want to go down, because that's how physics works, right? You throw a BB against a wall, it ricochets, okay? So the BB hits the top of the barrel, then goes back down, and then it goes back up, and then it goes back down, and then it kind of vibrates along the barrel or ricochets along the barrel. So if you have a wide bore, so again, that's 6.1 or bigger, and the bigger it is, the more of this issue you're going to have. If you have a wide bore, then it's going to have more room to bounce and less stabilization force. Okay, if you have a tight bore barrel, there's less room to bounce. So what's going to happen is, as your BB is going down the barrel, okay, it's going to bounce up, then it's going to bounce down, and it's going to eventually start stabilizing itself until it's fairly straight. Now, that is where your air cushion could come into effect. But the problem is that if you have a wide bore, that BB bounces more. If you have a tight bore, the BB bounces less. Okay, so by the time that a wide bore takes effect, that okay, it's stabilized in the barrel, and it's rotating down the middle of the barrel using that air cushion, provided that it's not still trying to ride along the top of the barrel, which most BBs do, then the tight bore has already stabilized the BB long before the wide bore has. Okay, that's why. That's why, in my opinion, tight bores are better. Okay, and from my experience, so as it's going down the barrel, it's going to go up, down, up, down, up, down until it stabilizes. And then once it's stable, you get a more consistent shot. So the tighter that bore, the less room for it to bounce up and down, and the more consistent it's going to be leaving the barrel, provided your barrel is also long enough to stabilize your BB. Now, that's why for gas blowbacks, especially the high kappa series or a lot of gas blowback rifles, they go all the way down to a 6.0 barrel, is because that works better for most people. Okay, again, your mileage may vary, and maybe I'm wrong for your particular gun and your particular setup, but typically speaking, the tighter your bore, the more consistent your shot. Now, the other question is, do you get more range out of your wide bores? Because that's the other part of it. Is tight bores, a lot of people will concede that tight bores are more consistent in terms of grouping. Wide bores have more range. And that's not necessarily true because, like we established at the beginning, there's a difference between range and maximum range, okay, or maximum effective range. Okay, so because your grouping is tighter, it's going to be tighter at range, typically speaking. Because of that, you're going to have more effective range. Because while, yes, I might do the airsoft thing of trying to lob in a shot at range, and maybe the tight bore has better spin on the BB because it's not contacting the walls as much, although, again, arguably that's not true, then maybe at range the hop up it's still spinning faster, which means it'll get downrange, which I would say to that argument, turn up your hop up on a tight bore. If you set your hop up appropriately, then it'll be fine. So the other part of it is maximum effective range, right? So if I am shooting downrange and someone is just peeking their head out, or maybe they're moving from side to side, or maybe they're popping out to shoot, popping back in, whatever, or maybe I just see their foot. It doesn't matter how much range I have. If the wide bore gave me an extra 100 feet of actual range, if it doesn't give me doesn't give me more maximum effective range, then it's useless to me, right? Because if I then have to put 100 shots downrange to try and hit them, it doesn't matter. I want first round accuracy, right? Yes, this is airsoft. They're never going to be as accurate as real guns, but the more accuracy you can squeeze out of it, the better. It means the less shots you have to make on target, and it means the quicker you're going to hit them, the less time they're going to have to react or to realize where you are, and the better your shooting ability will be. Okay. So if that was the case, I'd rather have a tight bore barrel that can hit someone reliably at 200 feet than a wide bore barrel that can't hit anything in particular at 300 feet. Maybe that's just my preference, but I think most people would agree with that. Okay, so with that being said, moving on to long versus short barrels. Okay, to clear the water on something. Yes, I run a high kappa. Yes, it's upgraded. no, your high kappa does not shoot as far as a well-built rifle. It just doesn't. With the same level of accuracy. Now, is it enough accuracy for you and where you play? Probably, sure. If that's your primary, then it very well might be. Okay. Now, will a high kappa with a 10-inch barrel shoot the same as a M4 or better as an M4 with a 10-inch barrel? Probably. Um, you know, depending on your build and everything like that, the gas blowback hop-ups tend to be a little bit better. And yeah, maybe your 10-inch high kappa shoots better than a 10-inch M4. Definitely better than a stock budget 10-inch M4 or your average rental gun, right? Does it do the job for you? Yeah, probably. So don't take that with any negativity. If that's your primary and that's what you run and that works for you, great. But what I'm gonna get at is the longer the barrel, the more effective range, right? So like, why would I run a 16-inch barrel, which is off camera, versus a 10-inch barrel? It goes up to about here inside the suppressor. Okay. So the downside to a longer barrel is it's longer and less maneuverable, right? The other downside is you can run out of air. Not in HPA builds so much, although at a certain length, maybe, okay, depending on your engine. Maybe if you're running a 30-inch barrel, like on a Barrett, okay, yeah, maybe you run out of air even on an HPA. But what's happening inside your barrel is as your BB is going down the barrel, if you have too long of a barrel, it can cause drag. Okay, now when might that come into a play? Right. Well, if you have a 16-inch barrel or an 18-inch barrel, like let's say you buy an M16, which I'm a fan of, but if you buy a full-length M16A4 and you're running a version 2 gearbox, which they do, with a full cylinder, and you're running that at your normal 400 FPS and with a stock barrel. The problem is, if you try and go up in BB weight, you need more and more air inside your cylinder to propel that BB, right? So there is a ratio, a magic ratio that is, air volume in cylinder compared to air volume. Cat's food went off, sorry. Air volume in cylinder to air volume in barrel should be X ratio for BB weight. Honestly, I'm not too spun up on it, but all you need to know is the heavier the BB, the more air behind it you need. Okay, so to reach a given joule limit or FPS, which is one of the reasons why HPAs are seen as so good, is because they can utilize that. Even out of my 16-inch, I'm generally running 4s. Same with this guy. Hiccups. Same with this guy, right? So, but I have HPA engines in them, so they have the air to do that. Whereas if you took a stock M16 length barrel, kind of your recce rifle or whatever, and with a version 2 gearbox, no upgrades, especially if you have a ported cylinder, you might run out of air inside your barrel. And what's going to happen is this BB is being propelled down the barrel, and eventually it's going to get to the point where it runs out of air and starts to drag along the bottom, which can cause issues with accuracy. It can cause issues with consistency of shot placement. It can cause other issues, and even going to wide bore won't change that. Now, if you use a tight bore barrel, that overall decreases the amount of air you need and can propel it down the barrel. And any HPA user knows that if you're using a tight bore barrel, both mine have 6.01, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but if you use a 6.01, then you're going to be able to lower your PSI and maybe even your dwell, although your dwell is different. Not in the purview of this video, though. So you're going to be more air efficient. So with that M16, you might want to, or your Dragunovs or your other long barrels, you might want to go with a lighter BB, although that gives problems outdoors. Okay, so that's an issue as well, but you might find that it shoots better with a more accurately with a lower weight BB, and that's probably because you're running out of air. So you might want to go to a shorter length. Now the problem with short length, and one of the reasons again that HPA has an advantage most of the time, is because you have basically unlimited air going down the BB, down the barrel, you won't run out of air, and because you have a dwell, whether that is mechanically set like on the N7 engine, or it is electronically set like on the Wolverine engines, okay, because you have a dwell, you can set it so it has just enough to get to the end of the barrel and not a ton more. So you're not wasting air, and also it's not as loud, which is one of the reasons, you know, you see a lot of HPA users running suppressors is to capture whatever air is left after you set your dwell. So you can use those heavier BBs, which carry their weight further, or inertia further, and have more range and more accuracy. So you can set it right at the end of that barrel, and so you're going to get good accuracy and consistency with heavier BBs. Okay, now having too short of a barrel, and again this is a little bit more prevalent in AEGs, especially if you don't have an appropriately ported cylinder. If you have too much air, what can happen is when it gets to the end of the barrel, yeah, this is a suppressor, but whatever, use your imagination. Once it gets to the end of the barrel, you're going to have all of that air coming out, right, and rapidly expanding, and that might throw off your shots as well. So it's important that if you're building your gun for accuracy and range, if it's HPA, you set your dwell and your PSI appropriately. If you're using an AEG or spring or whatever, that you make sure you have enough air behind your BB that it gets out the barrel, but not too much that it creates a mushroom cloud effect of air that will throw off your BB's trajectory. So having a longer barrel, though, getting back to the original topic, having a longer barrel is helpful because it stabilizes that BB further and can use more of your air available. Now, again, not necessarily prevalent with HPA, but if you use the example of high kappas, right? High kappas were originally designed for duster gas and at 1 joule. Now, in the American market, that doesn't really hold up. 1 duster gas isn't as prevalent, especially at airsoft stores, as green gas or red gas or maybe even black gas, although that's not very prevalent anymore either. So it wants to run on green gas. Now, you might notice that your TM, your original Tokyo Marui, high kappas or other gas blowbacks are seem to have a better shot-to-shot consistency or grouping on duster than they do on green gas. Why is that? Essentially because of dwell, right? So there's a mechanically set dwell based on the size of the nozzle, your piston or nozzle piston or whatever, your nozzle inside, the O-ring part, the plunger part behind the piston, how much gas can escape from your magazine, your hop-up setup, you know, whatever, out of the box, TM might shoot better with duster gas, even though it is a lower FPS and a lower PSI, because it's not meant for the higher levels. And just like I was talking about on the long guns, okay, any excess gas you have that escapes your barrel forms a pocket or a mushroom cloud, which can throw off your shot-to-shot consistency. Now, most of the clones, if you will, of the TM guns are meant to run on green gas, so they're going to be a little bit better. And just having like a heavier slide, for instance, means that more gas is being used to maneuver the slide or to cycle the slide, so less gas is going down the barrel, and that affects your air quotes dwell time, right? So yes, that might be the case, right? It might be the case that your gas blowback or your bolt action or whatever might work better at a lower FPS, might have better shot-to-shot consistency. But again, that gets back to maximum effective range, and that's why the delineation there is so important, is that again, like the recent example of my my P90, which was a stock Tokimori, that did have great range, but that's on a paper target or a static target, and it did have great maximum, maximum grouping size, right? Maximum range grouping size. But it was traveling at like negative FPS. It was like, I think about 290, 300. Okay. Now, because it's built for that setup at that joule limit, okay, if I then swap the hop up, the barrel, the spring, and because it's Tokimori, the entire drivetrain, gears, piston, motor, everything, to make it shoot a higher FPS, then I would get more maximum effective range, right? Because it's shooting a higher FPS, which means it gets to the target quicker, which means there's less drop, okay? Because let's say you turn your hop up off, if you drop and nothing is spinning the BB or anything, you drop a BB and you shoot at the same time, it leaves the barrel at the same time as you drop a BB, because how gravity works, it's going to get to the ground at the same time, provided no other forces are acting on the BB and the airsoft gun, right? So it's going to get to the ground at the same time because that's how gravity works. And so that's why you need backspin, right, to get it to further distances. And so if you were to upgrade it in FPS, then it's going to go further on a linear motion than on a lower FPS, provided the hop-up's off. Once you apply hop-up, then you have to compare like with like. So at a hop-up, an appropriate hop-up setting for maximum range, the higher FPS gun will shoot further than a low FPS gun. The reason being is because it's traveling more distance in the same time that gravity is taking effect. And it's the same with real guns, right? If you were to put your barrel level, because I'm not going to get into minute of angle adjustments and how far up your barrel points compared to your optic at certain ranges. That's, again, a different video. But if you put your barrel level, your real gun barrel level, on a completely leveled and flat range for the entire distance of that round, and then you take a projectile and you fire at the same time you drop the projectile, they're going to hit the ground at the same time because gravity is a constant. So, and it's the same thing with BBs. Now, assuming you're using the same weight BB or the same weight bullet. Now, if So if you have higher FPS, it covers more ground before it hits the ground than with a with a lower FPS. Now, if you were to use a heavier weight BB, because we're at a higher velocity, we can do that. If you're using a heavier weight BB, it carries that rotational inertia more, so the spin stays consistent longer in the barrel. And so, um, even with a tight bore barrel like my MTW, still shoots 300 feet. And yeah, I know airsofters can't measure range, but that is measured with a rangefinder, shooting at a telephone pole that is, approximately the width of a torso, maybe a little bit smaller, um, at about 300 feet with a tight bore consistently. Okay. Now, a lot of people will tell you that you have to use a wide bore, and wide bore shoot further than tight bores. And oh, my wide bore shoots 800 feet with high psi. And okay, that's cool, but I don't believe you, right? Unless I see it, unless I can measure the ranges, I don't believe it. Now again, maybe it is true that in your setup you do get more range. You get more range out of a wide bore setup than a tight bore setup, but is it more maximum effective range? And I think for airsofters, we really need to start talking about maximum effective range rather than maximum range, because again, it doesn't matter if this thing can shoot 400 feet if it can't hit a person at 400 feet. If you can only shoot 300 feet or 200 feet, but you can hit a person every time, that's what matters. And so hopefully that clears up some stuff with tight bore versus long bore, long barrel versus short barrel. And I'll be posting this in comments of in comment sections and mostly on Facebook, and using this to hopefully help inform people on the differences, at least from my perspective. So yeah,